what I plant today isn't for me. It might be not even for my children. It's for my grandchildren by the time they're seeing the real benefit, that fully developed, mature tree and everything it gives back to the community and to the ecosystem.
Hello, and welcome to Good Nature. I'm your host, Megan Leslie. In each episode of this podcast, we talk to the people who give me hope for the future of nature and wildlife. Today's episode is part one of a little Good Nature mini-series. It's no secret that climate change is making extreme weather events like storms and heat waves more frequent, and the fallout from these events impact every single person living in Canada. But there is also amazing work being done to use nature to help combat those issues, and I really wanted to spotlight that. So these two conversations are all about creative solutions to climate impacts. First, we'll talk about how forest restoration can help mitigate damage from flooding. Then in part two, we'll dive into the past decade of bigger and more intense wildfires and the growing movement to bring back Indigenous-led fire stewardship. Be sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss out on that conversation. It's going to be a great one. But for today, our guest is Donnie McPhee. Donnie spent his career at the National Tree Seed Center. Yeah, there's a National Tree Seed Center, and it's in Fredericton, New Brunswick, where Donnie devoted over 20 years to the mission of supporting forest restoration and fostering climate resilience. And these pursuits have become increasingly important as major floods become more frequent across Canada, especially on our East Coast. So let's get into it. Hello, Donnie. Welcome to Good Nature.
Good morning, Megan. Great to be here.
Well, I want to start with something that I think a lot of our audience can probably relate to, and that's flooding. Floods, as you know, they're becoming more and more frequent across Canada, and they can be devastating for people, but they can also be devastating for wildlife. And I think when most of us think about flood protection, we think of those man-made pieces of infrastructure like storm drains or levees and dams, that kind of stuff. But nature can play a significant role in flood protection too. So can you start just by explaining the role of trees and forests in helping a landscape manage water?
Yeah, I think when people, if they just stopped and breathe a little bit and think about, our natural environments and how they handled flooding, throughout history, because flooding's always happened, but yes, it's increased a lot now in recent times. A lot has to do with just human development. Like, where do we like to live? Where do we like to put our cottages? Where do we like to, recreate? And it's on these rivers and on these ocean fronts and stuff. And when we move into those areas, we tend to remove a lot of the natural environment that's there.
Mm-hmm. And what happens if a landscape doesn't have sufficient trees, sufficient species to help manage a sudden influx of water?
Well, I think we see it on the news all the time, and that's where, insurance agents and companies and stuff are losing their minds, and regulations are going in all the time about, well, no, you just can't build there, or if you do, you have to put up artificial barriers. But there are species, here in New Brunswick that were once very common along our floodplains, but they were basically extirpated due to the high quality, the high value of those woods, but also due to just people needing or wanting where they existed, those nice lake shores and river shores. So they clear cut them all away.
Well, one species that you've talked about a lot in your work is the bur oak. And for those who may never have heard of it, like me, I have to admit, can you tell us a little bit about this really special tree?
Yeah, so it is the most widely distributed of the oaks in all of North America. So if you're from Ontario or Quebec or Manitoba, you know the bur oak. It starts sort of in that pocket and it funnels all the way down into Texas. It's a large tree. It grows to 400 to 500 years old. There are remnant populations in New England and here in New Brunswick. So I was fortunate. I actually did a large study on bur oak because, same with me, I didn't know anything about bur oak.
Yeah, it's just oak. And, oak is oak.
Yeah, it's an oak. And we had a grad student come from India to actually, she was very interested in oaks. And she got here. And unfortunately, she was where most of our bur oak in New Brunswick live or still exists are on pasture lands. And she was terrified of cattle. So she came to do this master's program and she couldn't do it. And I was sort of looking, I had already started a master's in climate change stuff. But I was more always interested in trees. And so I said, oh, that might be a project for me. So we kind of did a survey and there were sort of 7 to 8 little pockets of bur oak left on the St. John, the Lustig River, in the watershed, but very small. And when you started looking into it, it's like all the historic records show that it used to be very common from, Perth, Andover, Grand Falls, so a couple of 100 kilometers north of Fredericton, all the way down to St. John. But those historic records show that in the early 1800s, from this region, white oak, and that was bur oak, it's the only one we'd hear, was just shipped out. Like it was more white oak shipped out of the St. John River Valley than any other species, but it only lasted for 10 years and then it stopped. And it stopped not because the value went down, it's because we basically took everything. It only exists like within 30 meters of our waterways on that narrow band, but where it was there everywhere, but then it was taken away.
Okay, so what is it about the bur oak? I mean, how is it related to floods, and what are the repercussions of not having this bur oak landscape anymore?
Yeah, so when you think of some of the more common floodplain species we have, like silver maple, and I know a lot of people call it a weed here, but Manitoba maple, they're really shallow rooted. And I had some bur oak growing. I'm growing them all the time, and I can sort of show you really quickly why they make such a great floodplain species. So this is a little seedling here. This is 5 weeks old. So I put the acorn in the pot 5 weeks ago. Yeah, it grows really fast.
Yeah.
But what you see grows fast. So this is another one. Unfortunately, I'm holding it up. A squirrel, I had it in my backyard and a squirrel nipped it off.
Squirrels.
And I was going to throw it out. I said, I have this top coming up. This might be. So this is what was above ground. This is what was below ground.
Oh,
so
it's like twice as long. Oh my gosh, it's
almost 3 times. So bur oak, they grow really fast, and most of their energy goes straight down into the ground. So in 1 year, you might see a 30 centimeter seedling above, and you could have a 3-meter taproot driving straight into the ground. So super resilient that way.
And just absorbing,
absolutely. The other really cool thing about bur oak is they coppice really well. And that means if an ice flow, so if you have bur oak seedlings and ice comes down the river and it cuts off the top of the tree,
right?
You have all that root system supporting, and it'll send up another shoot, another shoot, another shoot, and it'll do that for years. And finally, it'll get that one good year. And by then you've got this huge root system just absorbing nutrients and moisture, looking for somewhere to go, and it'll pop up a shoot and it'll skyrocket. So they're really neat that way.
And just absorbing those floodwaters. This is not bur oak, but someone once told me that a healthy silver maple can absorb 200 liters of water per hour. That sounds to me just intuitively like that has got to be better than a drainage portal or a culvert.
Absolutely. Yeah, and bur oak would be very similar with that. Now, and the other nice thing with bur oak is that where silver maple sometimes are susceptible to, like with climate change coming and things are drying, their root systems are along the surface, and they're sucking up water hard.
Yeah.
But if you get super long periods of drought, that can negatively affect silver maple a little bit. But where bur oak, where they have their taproot so far underground, they can withstand long periods, years of heavy droughts and still persist.
Okay, so it's clearly a super tree. So I want to know, what are conservationists doing to try and bring the bur oak back?
So there's a group that formed in New Brunswick back in around 2016, and we called ourselves BORT, the Bur Oak Restoration Team. And it was nothing official, but it was basically, there were actually a member from WWF, ECCC, Nature Trust, Nature Conservancy, the watershed groups, a couple of the holistic First Nation communities, just people who had been, I'd been talking with through my work on bur oak or had read about it. And we said, well, what can we do? So we started to come up with a a strategy, and we're still kind of working on it all the time. But the nice part is just by talking about it, a lot of communities, a lot of organizations, the city of Fredericton, the city of St. John, they're all starting to plant it just because people are talking about it. So it's kind of one of those weird things. We formed this group. We're going to form this conservation strategy. But when I walk around now, like along our floodplains, I'm seeing little bur oak seedlings everywhere. And that's because 20 years ago, through my work with CFS and bur oak, we planted about 30,000 bur oak through different forest initiative programs.
Yeah.
And a lot of those didn't survive. And that's one thing when you're dealing with planting on the floodplain, you have to understand that you might get 10% survival. Mm-hmm. But those 10% that grow, they put out thousands and hundreds of thousands of seed acorns every year. And that's your sort of your nursery for your developing going along.
Right. Well, thanks for sharing about how people just sort of came together and now you're hearing people talk about it. Because I was wondering, we are not just seeing reports in the news of climate change impacts, but we're experiencing it. And I wondered if that was leading to more interest in the ways that forest restoration can help. Sounds like it is in New Brunswick.
I really feel it is. I mean, all of our watershed groups, our First Nations communities along the Wustic River and stuff there. And then the nice part is that one of the issues with bur oak and any of the oak is the seed doesn't store. So what falls from the tree this year, like at the National Tree Seed Center, for almost all species, we can collect that seed, store it for future use. But with the white oaks, they really don't store. So what you collect this year, you have to grow next year. So if you didn't have a seed crop this year in New Brunswick and you wanted to grow seed next year, a lot of times what would happen is people would go to Ontario or somewhere else and start importing seed or seedlings from that area.
And it's not the same area.
Really, something that's really exciting for me is like the city of Fredericton is now growing. So all the trees the city of Fredericton wants to grow within the city and its limits, they now have their own nursery. And that just came online 2 years ago. Woodstock First Nation, they just put in their own nursery because they want to be growing seed for all of the, or seedlings for all of the communities along the Worcester Bay. Mataquack Provincial Park, they just put in their own nursery because same thing, they want to grow their own for their own. So they're going to be growing seedlings for all the parks, and all of them are very interested in bur oak, which is great. So, we've been out there collecting every fall and then providing seed to those organizations so they have local seed sources.
Okay, I'm so glad that we're talking about seeds because I really want to get into this. I think that if someone stops and thinks about restoration, they think about, well, you start with planting a tree, but that is not the beginning. And your work at the National Tree Seed Center starts way before that. You're telling us a bit about who's out there collecting and conserving tree seeds. Why is this such an important part of restoring ecosystems?
So in our educational systems, our traditional Western educational systems, most forestry students, they believe, just like you said, that a tree is a tree. And we don't teach in any of those systems or any of our educational systems about seed collection.
Really?
We don't, because in Canada, we plant about 600 million trees a year in Canada.
Yeah.
Off those 600 million, about 595 million are of 6 species. Those are conifer species used for forest industry. So the other 5 million, those mainly go to urban centers, like they're your Walmart trees or your local nursery trees, but still a very low percentage of them are hardwoods. So for forest industry, they understand the importance of forest genetics. So they're not just collecting seed from anywhere, planting it anywhere. They have seed orchards. So basically, historically, they've gone out, collected seed from the biggest, tallest, straightest trees, the ones that a forest industry would want. And that's what they plant out. Now, it's very regulated, and they are using the right genotypes, the right genetics for the right areas. Because if they don't, it costs them money. When Canada announced its 2 billion tree program, all of a sudden we were saying we're going to plant 2 billion trees, and they weren't going to be for forest industry. that really stimulated, well, where's all the seed going to come from? And as soon as we heard about the program, in my role as the coordinator for the National Seed Center, I started calling Ottawa. It's like, we don't have the seed. The seed is not there. So we were very fortunate where with the Seed Center, we received some funding through that program, and we started traveling the country and looking for willing and able and understanding partners. And a lot of that partnership was developed with First Nations communities across the country. We ran 50 in-the-field training sessions with Indigenous communities, hitting every province, every territory except for Nunavut. And then we also hosted 14 sessions where members came to Fredericton, and we would host 6 to 8 communities. And we try to do it so you'd have community members from coast to coast at the same session so that they would get to meet each other and get to knowledge share. Yes, we hosted 14 of them as well. And that was all about how do you collect seed? How do you process seed?
Right.
And then one of the things with our Indigenous seed collection program, and I was at the Convention of Forest Biodiversity in Montreal in 2022, and I did a presentation, and the first question I got was from a young Indigenous woman. She said, well, what's a white man up on stage talking about seed collecting? Now, I was very lucky because my staff and my manager, who is Indigenous, were all there, and they jumped up to my defense. Because one of the first things we started this program is we hired an Indigenous woman, Mary Knockwood. She's from Fort Folly First Nation here. She's our program manager. And again, I kind of had this vision of this program as the coordinator for the Seed Center, but I can't go out and meet with communities and tell them what's good for them. So the second question I got at the Convention of Forest Biodiversity was, well, how come we never heard of you? And it's like, well, that's why I'm here. The last thing we wanted to do was be, another white researcher knocking on a community's door saying, hey, do I have a program for you? What we really wanted to do is working through organizations, such as WWF, such as ECCC, such as, Nature Conservancy of Canada, letting them spread the word and then have communities approach us. And that's what we've been really fortunate to do. So I think it's close to 90 communities across Canada that we've been working with. Well, they didn't want to be bringing in seed from thousands of kilometers away to restore their lands. They wanted to have their seeds conserved. So if something happened to their lands, they could use that seed to come back to their properties. So that's one of the things the National Tree Seed Center is currently doing for these communities. The Seed Center doesn't own the seed. It's owned by the communities, but they're just storing it for the community. So if something ever happens, it's there to go back.
That's amazing. So what's different when Indigenous communities are leading the charge in this work? Does the work of seed collection and forest restoration benefit differently? What's different with Indigenous leadership?
I think one of the big differences is that, and I'm not like, I'm a white guy. I think like a white guy, I'm sure. And unfortunately, we tend to think about tomorrow. Whereas with Indigenous communities, they sort of are thinking of generations down the road.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's not just for me, it's down the road. And when you're dealing with forestry and planting trees, you have to think that way. Because what I plant today isn't for me. It might be not even for my children. It's for my grandchildren by the time they're seeing the real benefit, that fully developed, mature tree and everything it gives back to the community and to the ecosystem.
Thanks for sharing that. And thanks for being so open to learning so that you can share stories like that. Now, so I'm at the World Wildlife Fund. Wildlife is our middle name. And I think that when people think of species at risk or threatened species, I'm going to be honest, I think of wildlife, certain turtles or the beluga or the sage grouse. And I wonder, is preventing a plant species from disappearing, is that similar or different from an approach you take with wildlife?
So in Canada, we have about 240 species of trees that are native here. A lot more than people think.
Yeah.
About a quarter of those are currently under threat. They're not listed as endangered, but they're under threat. So, some of your listeners might have heard hemlock woolly adelgid. It's wiping out the hemlock in the east. Emerald ash borer is wiping out ash. butternut canker. So we're losing our butternut. Actually, New Brunswick is the only place left globally that has healthy populations of butternut, because butternut is basically being wiped out off the US. I mean, there are remnant trees here and there, but it's a fungal disease. You got mountain pine beetle. You have all these different things going on. Beech bark disease, Dutch elm disease, they're everywhere. But one of the things we always get is that when a species hits the endangered, like it met the criteria for endangered, it's almost too late for a conservation strategy, because you need that genetic diversity. And I'm sure it's the same with wildlife. We think of, I think of the cheetah, the prime example when you're talking about lack of genetic diversity within a species, the white rhino, any of those. Well, you can start bringing things back when they're at a very small number, but you're going to run into genetic complications down the road just because the diversity isn't there to withstand diseases and, changes. It's the same with tree species.
That's interesting, because I thought, seeds are seeds. It's going to be fine. We'll have more trees. But that's really interesting.
The real cool thing is, though, with wildlife, unfortunately, sometimes you're relying on zoos or on, enclosed areas to protect those few wildlife. But with seed and trees, you can store seed. So that's sort of the work of the National Tree Seed Center. They have 200 and some different species of trees and shrubs in storage and working to have more. But that seed can be stored for almost indefinitely if they are collected at the right time. When they're mature, they're handled, dried down, and then stored under the proper conditions.
Okay. So you and I are talking about how we can actually deal with some of these tree species that are at risk. But hey, let's get to the root cause here. What do you think Canada should be doing differently when it comes to at-risk trees?
It's such a tough question. And, I can give an example of, I've done a lot of work with beech bark disease. So beech bark disease is a disease that came in through the port in Halifax back in the early 1900s, late 1800s.
Through the port.
And it's slowly working its way across the country. That disease now is just hitting Ontario. So I've been asked, okay, what's the work you've done in the Maritimes for disease resistance? Because there is resistance. But the problem coming up from the US, there's a nematode that's affecting, and it's beech wilt. And then there's another beech weevil that's come in. So our biggest problem is time when you're dealing with all of these species, is that, because I truly believe that nature will work things out, but just not on our individual timelines. And sometimes we just have to protect enough of the genetics that are there in natural habitats, protecting those ecosystems. And yep, we might lose 95% due to a disease or due to something that comes through. But there is resistance. In almost all cases, there is natural resistance in those forests and in those ecosystems. It just might take hundreds of years, thousands of years, before the forests recover to how we perceive or want to perceive them to be.
Donnie, this has been a really great conversation, and I've loved learning about your work and your experiences. I got to know, what motivated you to dedicate yourself to the future of healthy forests in Canada?
I don't know if it was motivated. I think I've always been someone that's open to change. Like, I'm retired, and I told my wife in my retirement, if my kids ask me to do anything, I'm doing it. I don't care what it is. So, here I am, 60 years. I just started mountain biking. I just started alpine touring, skiing, because that's what my kids want to do, and I'm going to do it. But I've kind of had that view, I think, throughout my whole life. So I grew up in Cape Breton, and one of the things in Cape Breton, and I didn't realize this until later, was that I grew up with looking for connections with people. So the old saying, what's your father's name?
Yeah.
That's about looking for connections. It's not about who's your father. It's like, can I find something in common with you so we can connect? And somehow I think that is translated to how I view when I'm walking in the woods. I'm looking to connect. I'm looking for commonalities. I'm looking for, things. And that just sort of embedded in me. And here I am.
You're making me tear up. That's really beautiful. Well, thank you. And I know that you have listened or watched the podcast before, so you know what's coming next.
Here it comes.
Here it comes. Because on this show, we end every interview with a lightning round series of questions called the Trail Mix. And we're going to put this trail through a beautiful forest. So a beautiful, healthy forest. So I'm going to ask you some quick questions and you're going to give me quick answers. Are you ready?
I hope so.
As ready as you can be, I know. Okay, easy one to start off. What's your favorite fun fact about trees?
My favorite fun fact about trees is that they will be here way longer than me, and they will see and experience way more than I ever could hope to.
Beautiful. Okay, Donnie, all trees are special, but what is the most iconic Canadian tree species?
Yeah, I mean, I have to go with sugar maple,
Okay.
I think. I mean,
Yeah.
it's on our flag.
Yeah.
It's sort of, I think when I'm traveling, sugar maple is the
Yeah.
maple tree is sort of Canada's
It's pretty
tree.
iconic. Yeah,
It
for
is,
sure.
yeah.
Okay, then, well, if you were a tree, what tree would you be? And would it be the bur oak?
I would have to say yes. It's funny. You don't know sometimes if you are it or it is you. But for me, I associate with a bur oak. When I see one, I didn't know what one was until I was in my mid-20s. Never even knew. But once I saw a bur oak, man, I have bur oak eyes. Like if I'm anywhere in the world, I'm looking for a bur oak.
Amazing. With your bur oak eyes, what is the favorite forest that you have ever visited?
Well, I just came back from a trip to Mexico, and it wasn't your typical. I was a hiking trip with a fellow researcher, Carlos Ramirez, who's a forest tree biologist, conservation guy, and he took me to the high mountains, and we were in a forest. Actually, in the background, those two pine cones you see behind me on the mantle,
Yeah.
those are from Pinus maximus martinii. And it's an ancient pine species, extremely rare, one of the rarest tree species in the world. We were in that habitat, and it blew me away, like just being there.
Wow.
The Garry Oak ecosystem out in Victoria and Vancouver is pretty cool as well.
Yeah, we got some good ones here in Canada, for sure.
Yeah.
And Donnie, what's one thing that everyone can do to protect our trees and forests?
I think protection first comes from acceptance and understanding what it's given to you. And, I've hired a lot of students at the Canadian Forest Service over here, and it always surprised me, some students, when I'd say, I'd ask a question like, do you get out in nature? And so many students, yes, I walk from the library to my residence, and I go through the little patch of woods here. And it's like, it's hard to have connection to something unless you get out and experience it.
Yeah.
So I think before I can start asking people to protect, I have to ask people to connect. And I think just getting out in our forests, in a real forest, get out to our national parks, our provincial parks, our conservation areas, and experience them. And then I think the protection and that need to protect, it's just innate. It's going to happen.
That is great advice. Thank you so much for this conversation, and thanks for joining us on Good Nature.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity, Megan. It's so nice to meet you.
In the world of nature and conservation, there are a lot of misconceptions flying around. So today, I'm going to use the orca phone to call up one of my WWF-Canada colleagues, and we're going to bust one of those pesky nature myths. Today's guest, he's in our Toronto office, and it's Cathal Doherty, our soil specialist at WWF-Canada. Let's see what he has to say. Hey, Cathal, what myth are we busting today?
Good afternoon, Megan. I want to push back on one of the most persistent myths about the natural worlds.
What is it?
Swamps, wetlands, marshes are thought of as gloomy, unproductive wastelands.
Yes.
And I want to push back on that myth.
Push away. Tell me about it.
Okay, so for a little bit of context, this perception runs deep throughout different cultures. Wetlands are often seen as these eerie, kind of dark places. You have the will-o-wisp, those flickering lights that are leading people to darkness. Like spooky. Lord of the Rings fans, you have the dead marshes. Those one of the most terrifying scenes in the entire trilogy. And unfortunately, that fear shifted in around the year 1850 into something of a bit of an annoyance. So then swamps started becoming different words like dismal. The Great Dismal Swamps started to being used to describe these different wetland areas. And from 1850, they started becoming drained and transferred into non-wetland systems. And I think that had not only an impact on the local environment, but globally, the amount of carbon that released and the amount of impact that had on the hydrology in these environments.
So carbon being released from the bog.
Yeah, because when you drain these wetland areas, what you're doing is that water was keeping a lot of the carbon in the ecosystem. So when you remove the water and you remove all the soil, all of that living, breathing soil is gonna release all that CO2 back into the atmosphere.
Okay.
And I think, and I have to give kudos to Shrek, because Shrek is a hero of the swamp, and he makes
Wasn't expecting that. Yeah.
And this is a story that was a myth, but I really think the story's changing around here. And Shrek is an example where he's the hero born of the swamp. His family moves back into the swamp. It's a place of birth. It's a place of life. And I really think that we're now seeing swamps as they are, these beautiful, biodiverse, rich areas. And, we're really starting, the Ramsar Convention on wetlands and all these different amazing things we're doing on the ground is really turning that myth on its head.
I love it. I will look at swamps differently for sure. Thanks so much for busting that myth.
Thank you.
Thanks again to today's guests, Donnie McPhee and Cathal Doherty. And thank you for joining us on Good Nature. You can stay up to date on Good Nature and all things WWF-Canada by signing up for our newsletter, Living Planet News. And if you have any thoughts on the show, ideas for episodes, or questions to share, please leave a comment or email us at goodnature@wwfcanada.org. And we'll see you next time.